know their product better than their sales guys do. Constantly understanding new products, new ways of working, and just asking why. The more certain you can be, the better the outcome. I'm someone who's really good with a computer attached to me. We manufacture that straight out of a digital model. That means that we can guarantee that it's correct. You should know every single part of what's in there, how it's been put together, exactly what it is. There isn't that many businesses like Facet.
I'm very, very excited today to welcome Bruce from Facet Homes. This is a podcast I would say I've been most excited by. When I met you and you ran me through what you do, I thought I need to get involved with what Facet Homes is doing. And we've been speaking on a couple of projects since, and I'm always thinking, how can we get you involved? We normally have a first question we ask our guests, but just beforehand, because I think it's really important to understand exactly what you do, can you give a brief summary? Because I don't think I will do it justice otherwise.
Fair enough. So Facet Homes is a design, build, manufacture company. We're a collaborative team of architects, engineers, construction managers, all combined into one business. So we do everything from initial concept, manufacturing, construction management, services, utilities, planning, everything end to end. That's really our specialism. We do this by using digital design, digital manufacturing techniques. So we're trying to transform the kind of chaos of construction into a science through technology. So we're, unlike a lot of people thinking about modular, kind of off-site fabrication, that's not really us. We're much more about transformation of traditional processes with the use of technology. So we build houses for developers and private clients.
Fantastic. And that's why I didn't do it myself, because I could not say it that concise. So, first question, when did you last lose the plot?
When do I lose the plot? I generally lose the plot with less and less these days. I'm much calmer than I used to be when I was a younger fella. Generally, the things that drive me insane are arbitrary planning decisions or incompetence in subcontractors. So we struggle with some of the subcontractors or particular brands of subcontractors, plumbers sometimes, and they can be quite hard to navigate. But yeah, the biggest kind of infuriation is really planning decisions which have got no bearing on reality. I just think are insane.
I agree. And on the plumbing side, and this is actually something I wanted to touch on later, but I think it's relevant. It is a hard thing right now, almost blending your modern methods with the traditional methods that you almost still need to have.
So the approach that we have is, if we can change something into a product and then we can resolve a construction detail with manufacturing. So for example, we manufacture quite complex timber components which resolve construction details. So an example, flat roof, right? Flat roof, you need it to be perfectly 1 degree full, it falls into a gutter, there's a parapet edge detail, kind of stuff that would traditionally be done by hand with a carpenter. We manufacture that straight out of a digital model that means that we can guarantee that it's correct. If we can take that approach, if we can manufacture it and resolve a construction detail, we will. Then there's other things that you just can't. So you can't manufacture plumbing and electrics. So you have to deal with it, but it's the same for everybody.
But I guess, if from a digital manufacturing point of view, have you got into the point where you are ordering SVPs and other elements where you go, here you go, plumber, this is perfect, put it in? So it's a hybrid, right? So we want to get value where we can. So we'll manufacture as much of the building as possible. Probably about 55-60% of the building is manufactured. And then the rest of it is traditional subcontracts. So we'll use, a plumber will be on, supply and install heating systems, soil stacks, drainage, and there'll be a very tight set of information because we've modeled it all in 3D. So what we do is we quality control traditional processes through the use of technology. So we'll model everything in 3D, so the actual drainage stacks, the MVHR, so ductwork, all in 3D. We know exactly where it's going to be, and it's defined in our design information, and therefore we can make sure that at least the plumber is
putting the stuff in the right place.
Yeah.
We'll also do incredibly detailed engineering specifications. So we work with a separate heating engineer who'll do an entire scheduled list, every single component, every single valve, every single diameter of plumbing, every single pump will be specified, so that we can really have control over the project, as opposed to, here you go plumber, just choose whatever you want, decide where you want to run it. So we control it through our design process to make it more scientific,
so
rather than
know the true performance better.
Yeah, which means that we know we can benchmark against other projects. So one project performs, the other project doesn't, we know there's a problem because we've used the same system, the same components, the same approach over and over again.
Yeah. Okay, very interesting. Obviously very evident within 5 minutes of speaking to you, you are not the typical contractor archetype. And you've obviously come at it from a completely different process. And to me, from the outside, it seems your whole journey, not just in construction, but architecture and further back, seems meticulously, not planned, but it's been a very thoughtful process. With some of our other guests, I would say people perhaps fell into their line of work and then fell in love with it. For me, it seems different with you.
So my background, my training is as an industrial designer or industrial engineer, which is really the creation of products. So your bike, your phone, your car, they've all come through this industrial design process. And if you look at how industrial products are made these days, they've been designed on the computer and then they've used machines of some kind to transform it. So take your iPhone. Nobody at any point has carved it out of a block of wood or steel or metal. Even the mold has gone from the digital design into production with no human hand touching it. There's human assembly, so most products you'll find there's some level of human assembly, so that you're not so much cars these days, but bikes and phones still human assembled. And that as a process to me makes total sense, right? You know, that's what the 21st century product is. And I've always been fascinated by buildings and space and architecture, and it's just the marrying of these two passions really. It's like how can we take this industrial design approach and apply it to construction? And I just love learning. So we're constantly understanding new products, new ways of working, and just asking why. You know, what is this? Why does it have to be like this? What is the specification? And not taking anything at face value. And we have a bunch of people in the studio who are like that. There's not a single person from a construction background in our studio. I've always been a computer guy.
Okay.
So like my kind of natural skill is in 3D computers.
Yeah.
That's what I've always gravitated towards. Yeah. And systems design somehow, like figuring out how to get the most out of like computer design systems, and that's always kind of followed through.
It's awesome. So I'll take it you've probably seen that whole sector and industry change. Have you sort of been like developing and growing with it? You must have been a rare sort of breed to be so into it at that age, right? Because it probably wasn't as common then.
Yeah, I mean, so we had an Apple Mac.
Yeah.
When I was 11, like a Mac Classic, like the small boxy ones with a little small tiny window. Yeah. Had one of those, and my dad had a like Coral Draw or something like package, which is like a drawing package with Bezier curves and stuff. Yeah. And I just loved it, and that was the beginning. And then as soon as I went to do my foundation course, there was they had silicon graphics machines, which are like the latest 3D graphics machines. I mean, they were rubbish. You could basically create a donut and spin a donut on the screen. That was about it. And then from that, I kind of followed through to my first degree, where they were really focused on use of 3D CAD software. Yeah. So I've kind of followed that route.
So was it just easy for you?
Yeah. It's
the way that you'd always operated.
Yeah, I have an affinity with software.
Yeah. I mean, you chose a good thing to have an affinity with.
Yeah.
After you finished university / your masters, and you can correct me if I get the timing wrong here. Don't know if it was your first job or subsequent, but you worked at Foster's and Partners.
Yeah, I studied industrial design,
Yeah.
and then I actually changed and did fine art. So I actually completed my BA in fine art, which is a sculpture course in Manchester. Well, it was a kind of sculpture multimedia. It wasn't really multimedia; it was non-media specific. So you could do film or sculpture or painting. You could do whatever you want. And then and during that period, I was working using 3D computers because I was really good at it part-time in an architecture studio to earn money. And then straight out of uni, I landed at Norman Foster's, which was an amazing experience. I was there for three and a half years, working on loads of crazy projects. And again, my specialism was using 3D computer software. And at that point, they had a bit of 3D in the office, but it wasn't being used very well. They didn't really know how to translate their two-dimensional designs into 3D. It wasn't really part of their design process. So I kind of showed them how we could bring it into a really early stage of the thought process in design development. So that's what I specialised in. At Foster's was design development. So I did a lot of competition teams, project development with kind of working maybe 2-3 weeks or 4 weeks at a time, project to project.
Yeah. So was it sort of like a perfect match of them essentially being a kind of progressive architect and your skill set, and they sort of just let you run with it and test stuff out essentially? Yeah,
basically, yeah. They were really happy to, they gave me so much space to kind of do things. I worked with Norman himself on a couple of his houses, did loads of really cool stuff.
Yeah.
And then after that, that's when I went to the Royal College of Art and did my master's in a course called Design Products, which is like a designer maker course. And I really specialised in digital design and digital manufacturing. So
within construction or just generally speaking?
So at that point, I was experimenting with technology. So I would go out and find companies in industry that had laser cutting or CNC manufacturing or CNC wire bending, all these kind of digital manufacturing techniques that people used in industry. And then I would use them and experiment with them. And I was kind of playing with architectural forms and kind of just really trying to build an idea of how I, as somebody who can't make, I'm not a maker, right? You give me a piece of foam and try and cut it with a knife, I can't do it. I'm someone who's really good with a computer attached to me. So I was like, how can I make with computers? And just to kind of seeded the idea about making with computers and making architecture. So it was just kind of loosely kind of playing around the edges really. Then
was there ever a point where you were just like, I'm going to change how construction works here?
No, not really. I don't know. I think at some point in probably in about 2006, 2005, I was like, actually, I think we can use the manufacturing industry's technology to make houses specifically. Because I looked at the house. I mean, if you look at skyscrapers and stuff, the way that they're contracted, the way that they're designed are very industrialized, but they're not quite product. Whereas I looked at the house and I was like, this is a prime opportunity to change it into a product, to think of the house as a product. And that's probably at that point. And that covers thinking of the house as a product it's not just about manufacturing, it's that kind of idea of the product as a whole. So you think about Apple, right? They build trust, they build really good products that you believe in. Last year's model is better than the previous year's, or vice versa. It's that kind of broader idea of the product, which I thought you could apply to the home. And that really started in like 2005-06. As a kind of basis. But it was more of at the beginning, it was more of a theory to kind of experiment and explore rather than I think this is going to really change the way that we could do things.
Okay. And from a product perspective, obviously you're, due to the information you have and how you design, you know exactly how everything is built. And so unlike perhaps a more traditional method where is it built exactly as it's designed, ? And then is all the design information in one clear folder or set of folders? That's another ? Whereas it seems like you organise things, as I said, very meticulously. So does that mean, or have you returned back to any projects and gone, this is a product, we know exactly what the issue is and we can fix it easier than typical?
100%. So we learned early on in the buildings that we started building first properties in 2010, 2011. And over that time, you would find that there was a problem with it. And then if it wasn't designed and detailed, or I remember there was some kind of soffit detail over a window where there was an issue with it and nobody could tell me what was behind it. I was like, this is unacceptable. Like if you think about a product, you should know every single part of what's in there, how it's been put together, exactly what it is. So we call it built as designed, which seems obvious that you should build it as it's designed, but it doesn't happen, reality, right?
Yeah.
So now we have a very meticulous process for detail approval, for product approval, for everything. So basically we know of any house that we build now exactly what it's made of, exactly where everything is, and you can track back any kind of defect or problem that can arise and understand it fully and resolve the situation, as opposed to those horrible times where you're like, there's a problem but nobody knows what it is. Nobody knows.
A variety of problems. Yeah. Slight test for you here.
Yeah.
See if you know your own content, even though you didn't say it. Architect. Do you know the origination of the word?
I don't know if I do.
Because when I was watching one of your YouTube videos, it was on there, which is architect is derived from archi being chief, and tecton builder.
Yeah, so it's like master craftsman, right?
Yeah. Exactly. But I sort of heard it and I was like, chief builder, and I've discussed this with architects that I know for a while. It's like, why is the architect not more heavily involved in the construction process? When I've only been in the industry for 13 years, it sounds like architects used to be more at the helm and they got slowly phased out to just like a consultant. Was there a conscious decision from you to go, I want to take control back of the construction process?
I mean, definitely. If you look at, on that point, if you look at the role of the architect, maybe 150 years ago, they were the head of the master craftsman. They sat at the top and they had a whole bunch of craftsmen sitting below them, and they instructed them, and they knew intimately, not necessarily how to do everything, but they knew what they wanted and they had control over the process. And then over time, they've become, like you say, kind of slightly separated from that actual mechanics of construction and become more conceptual, I would say. And I think, again, coming back to the idea of a product, if you're going to make a really good product as an industrial designer, you've got to understand every process. And if you look at the best key kind of designs that have come in the 20th century, so for example the Eames plywood chair, right? They discovered that there was new manufacturing process which was basically compression molding plywood into forms. So you get the layers of ply, you put glue in, you put it in a mold, you form it, and then they made these chairs, and they're super classic chairs, but they understood the manufacturing process. So the more you get to grips with how things are made, the more you master it, the better the product can be. And I think that now I think something's changing in the architecture industry at the moment. I see a lot more people moving into construction than ever before. And
it seems to be, by the way, in the architectural practices we work with, the best people get nabbed and they go contractor side.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised, because it's frustrating, I think, being an architect. They want to be closer to the action, but somehow they're not. So for me, it's extremely important that the architects in our business work side by side with everybody. They see really close up the output of the decisions that they've made. And quite often we get young architects coming into the business and they draw something and then they expect it just to be built, and you're like, how are we going to build that? Literally, how are we going to do that? And they're like,
So out of interest, are you then hiring architects with a certain mindset, or are you training architects to have the mindset that you like to have?
It's a bit of a mixture, really. So you can never quite tell, how people are going to respond to our way of working. But broadly, I like to choose people who are highly technically proficient, really broadly, because if you've got real competency in something, it shows that you're willing to put the effort in and master it. If you just expect things to come to you, then it won't necessarily happen. So that's the one thing I try and look for. But you'll find some people are more, really into the digital design things and less into the construction side, but we try to get people to think about both at the same time. But it's definitely a baptism of fire.
When you say less about the construction side, do you mean that when you take it on site, or literally the detail of how it will be built?
Not so much the detail, but the reality of building, you know, the reality of having lots of different products, lots of different contractors, lots of different design information, and understanding how that soup of things happens. And some architects do really well at it and some don't. So I can never quite tell exactly who, but some people really thrive in that environment of actually feeling like they're in control of a construction project, and other people just freak out.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, a lot of responsibility at that stage. Obviously, where you are now, as you said, you built the first house in 2010?
Yeah, 2000 and probably the beginning of end of 2010, 2011. So 2011 we built the first 4 projects, several of which were quite tiny.
Yeah.
But that's where we started.
Yeah, and so obviously from where you were then to where you are today, I'm sure you've learned a hell of a lot about your own processes. Looking at it from the outside, as I mentioned before, it seems like there's that mix between perfect design and reality on site. What have been some of the biggest hurdles you've had to overcome from then to now?
Wow, I mean, there's a lot. You know, the challenges of starting with nothing and growing a business and you know, mastering all the various different angles has been quite a challenge. But we've kind of unpicked it over the years bit by bit. So at the beginning, you know, we weren't the main contractor. We were kind of timber frame specialist, if you like, with some design kind of remit. So some of the projects at the beginning, we weren't even the principal designer. And then over time, we decided to take more and more of that responsibility on. And I think if you looked at us maybe in 2012, we probably looked a bit more like a timber frame company who was also a contractor, whereas now we look very different, you know, in the way we operate. I think we learned quite quickly that you can fall into the same trap as any contractor. You know, just being a general contractor is quite hard. Each project, everything's different. You don't really have that much control of things. So actually at that point we decided, let's really leverage the technology that we have. So let's get bills of quantities out of our model. Let's have much more data information so we can get more of a hold of the project. And then over time, we've become more and more expert in heating systems design, cooling, air handling. And so over the last kind of 14 years, we've become more and more expert in everything. And now we're really, really into the nuts and bolts of like heating engineering, actually. We've become quite proficient.
Yeah, and I guess, I don't know if this is the right term or not, but it seems like you're standardizing processes, perhaps. Like, as in, for example, I know you work exclusively with Velvac, the window supplier, and I'm assuming there's various elements like that where you go, we know exactly who the supplier is, we know exactly what the cost is, therefore we can give high accuracy when pricing, designing, everything. Yeah,
it's about certainty. I mean, that's the one thing that, I mean, I'm sure you've experienced in construction, is the lack of certainty, and that certainty in time, cost, performance, defects, and the more certain you can be, the better the outcome. So rather than saying, well, if you want certainty, you have to produce the same house, we don't. We have the same kit of parts, so the same product. So for example, with Velvac, our window supplier, we've got a very long-term relationship with them. Been using their windows since 2011. And we know their product better than they know. We know their product better than their sales guys do, about all the options, all the details, glazing types. We've modelled their product in our own
I was about to say, do you have all of their products in your system so you can just whack them in?
So like BIM, you know, so building information modelling is this kind of next generation architectural software, and you can get what are called families. So you can go and get the digital version of Velvac's Windows, for example, off the internet. And Velvac have made it, but it's absolute rubbish. It doesn't represent their product very well. There's only like 2 or 3 variations. You can't really do anything with it. It's a bit like a kind of like fake version of their window. Whereas we took their product and built it entirely as a system in our design.
How do you do that without how do you get the information to do that?
So you just look at their product catalogue, and then you bench test it. So you design all the windows for your house, all the variations, and then you give them the finished frame size information that you think, and you also let them have a look at it. So they give you a quote which has got all their detailed specification, and you've also produced the same information from your model, and you kind of see if they match. And now,
do you always say like, this is the quote?
Yeah, basically that's what we do now, is we send them the data. So we say, here are literally millimetre exactly frame sizes, packers, handles, everything. I've actually sat with them and looked at their production information management system, which is, the data input, to make sure that what we give them, they can just put into their system.
It's so funny, isn't it? You saying like, here's how you do your job. Here's how to quote.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we do. We try and understand, like I said before, the heating design at the moment is the new really complicated thing with the new regulations, overheating, heat recovery systems. It's quite it's become more complicated than it was 3 or 4 years ago. So we're really trying to unpick that at the moment. I think we're getting a much better understanding of it, at least. And
you said accuracy, and we touched on this when I came to see you, about how, I think you said from a planning stage, you can be within 1 to 2% of construction accuracy.
Yeah.
And I'm going to park, and you might say don't park it, I'm going to park groundworks out of that, because I assume...
No, groundworks
included. Okay, fine. That's obviously, or for me looking from the outside, that is a huge problem that you are solving from a developer point of view, because for me, if I look at it, what are the uncertainties? It's time, which I'm assuming you are pretty accurate on that. It's the cost of delivery. Let's call it a little thing, errors. And then the biggest one, which let's say you can't control, I think at this point in time, is certainty of exit. Because given especially finance rates at the moment, a product sat in the market for months, let alone years, has a big effect on profit. A question I have for you, and I don't know if you'll have an answer, is do you foresee a way of solving that problem in terms of the certainty of exit, whether it's from a developer or contractor point of view? And I say this I have this vision of, can you get a client, a purchaser on board, whether it's a flat or a house, and go, there's nothing there now, you're going to put a down payment and you're going to have this delivered in X amount of time. The same way a Tesla or a whatever. Do you foresee that happening?
I think you can do that. Yeah. I mean, we at the moment, customer comes to us with a very sketchy outline design of what they want, and we are very quickly able to do a kind of conceptual model. When I say conceptual, it's just like, roughly it's this size, it's roughly got this much external envelope, and therefore we put it into our costing system, and that tells us that super high level of cost on the overall project. And plus that kind of accuracy on services and utilities, that we have a database that we can draw on. There's obviously less certainty on things like utilities than there is on a lot of other aspects of the building, but more and more now.
Is that just because it's a third party you actually have no control over?
And it's subject to more ground investigation or working through with an engineer. But I think if you can take out some of the financial uncertainty as well, then you can get to that. And I think a lot of the time at the moment, if there's a heavy amount of lending in a project, it's going to skew it, depending on whoever's lending it, their particular interest rates, they might change their mind. They might need the money back, right? And I think if you can reduce the amount of lending overall in a project, then I think you'll get more certainty on outcome.
I think it said if you can reduce the amount of leverage,
lending and finance.
So why do you think that would improve certainty?
I think that it will. So on the other extreme, right, the really large projects with a very high amount of lending can be killed by it, right?
Yeah.
So
you're talking about from just a financial viability point of view. Yes.
Yeah. But it also affects the overall outcome, right? So if you've got certainty on your construction costs, or you've got certainty on 95% of your construction costs, and you've got certainty on your procurement route, and you've got a customer base of buyers, then I think you've got everything wrapped up there, right?
Yeah. I guess it's just, I'm imagining from, okay, let's say sat in the middle as developer, you've got to fund the project, got to pay the contractor. Typically speaking, your customer is going to be using leverage to buy their home. Now, that leverage is not available typically until you finished the project. So that's why I'm trying to envision, how can that problem be solved such that
it's never going to go away. But
I know, but it's so important, I think, to deliver houses at scale. I think that's such a big thing, because you take that risk out, people can build more confidently. Buyers have more certainty of product.
But you can do, so simple things like if you have a landowner interest, for example, you can remove some of the lending. So let's say the difference between two projects, one of them, the landowner just wants to exit straight away, wants that entire value of the land to be offloaded onto the developer. There's going to be potentially more lending there, unless that developer's got a lot of cash. If the landowner has an interest in the development as well, then you can, and doesn't need to be paid up front, then you can slightly change the balance, if you see what I mean. So there are small things in there that you can do.
I don't know how many circumstantial landowners are just happy to just build on the land though. I think it's just taking on a more risk, I think, for them. So far, obviously, it's been largely private-led clients. So what do you think is the biggest hurdle to getting developers?
Well, it's just, so the thing for us is there's been a shift in the last couple of years in terms of cost. So if you look at where we were 2011, we were relatively more expensive than your traditional contractor. But because of the manufacturing technology that sits in the middle of the business, we've seen our costs be very, very static and not be subject to such high inflation, particularly on the labour side, because there's less labour. And a couple of years ago, we kind of crossed that point of that kind of tipping point where we're like, actually, there's a big opportunity for us now to transition into the developer sector. And that's the journey we're on,
Right. So beforehand, it was like your methodology was better, but someone had to be willing to almost pay up for it. Whereas now you offer the price incentive as well.
Exactly.
Which I think of it sort of like, it's like electric cars. It's like, there's all these perks that were given to having an electric car, which made everyone get it, and now it becomes standard. And because there's more demand, I'm sure the price of electric cars has gone down in terms of manufacturing. So now it's a healthy ecosystem.
For example, if you look at our core manufacturing kit, it sits in the middle of our manufacturing setup. It is probably about 30% cheaper than it was 12 years ago.
Wow.
So there is the economics, whereas labour has gone up maybe 100%. So the difference is 130%. Between the cost of the machinery going down and the labour going up. It's crazy.
So it reached a nice inflection point.
And we saw that maybe 2 or 3 years ago, where you used to be able to get people on site, low skilled labour with very little skill. They would turn up and they'd be paid maybe 80, 90, 100 quid a day tops. They're getting 160, 170 quid a day now. And it's
and more sometimes. I'm seeing 200 sometimes.
And it's crazy. And so that steep incline on that is, you need to take a different approach. Housing sector is particularly exposed to that, because so much, particularly in the larger housing sector, so much of it's based on low skilled labour. But not yet. There isn't that many solutions to how you overcome that yet.
Obviously, you're a market leader, let's call it, in this methodology of delivery. Do you think increasingly over time, construction will move away from traditional methods and into the Facet way of thinking?
So, the Facet way of thinking is a hybrid. It is about how do you transform the construction site. And I think there's a number of different ways you could transform the construction site. We are one, and I'd hope that more people would look and experiment and use technology and see how you can do things in a different way. But definitely the thing that I think is going to change is, I think houses will become more kit parts assembled on site, as opposed to what you call construction. But that transformation is going to be reasonably slow, I think, because there isn't that many businesses like Facet. There's been a lot of focus on modular construction, factory-based construction, which is really not happened. There's a difference between making something in a factory or a warehouse and pre-manufactured value. So you can make a house or a large part of a house in a factory, but you might be doing the same thing. You might be just a bunch of guys putting stuff together with a lot of low-skilled labour.
Or just in a contained environment, and it can just be shipped to wherever.
And you haven't changed the fundamental economics, right? Whereas if you use manufacturing, which is the making of things with machines and really technology, you can change the economics. So
everything's on site, isn't it? So,
So our focus is actually the critical thing is how do we use digital technology to manufacture components for buildings, not where it's done. So we could do what we do. In fact, we have done, so we use mobile manufacturing where we take our manufacturing with us to the construction site and we make components on demand, which is a very traditional way of working. You turn up with some tools, with some materials and some labour, and you make some houses. That's what we do. You could do that in a factory. We could take our technology and do it in a factory. In fact, we did for 3 years. We were off-site shipping things out, but it just added a lot of cost and it didn't really seem to add a lot of benefit.
I was about to say it's less efficient, isn't it? Whereas you just move your only transportation cost is moving the machinery there and then just delivering the timber to site, right?
Exactly. So, you cut out the transportation costs, and you also, in that same way that making things on site is quite flexible, you do it when you're ready. If you've got a problem, then you stop. You don't have that kind of backlog of components waiting for you in 3 weeks, down the line. It's just much more straightforward as a building methodology. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to explore these kind of ways of working, which are, you're still going to be, we still buy in a lot of components as well that are made in factories. So we have a lot of aluminium work, laser cut, staircases, all sorts of things that come in. And actually, with a bit of scale, the next thing for us is MEP. So you can do kind of sections of your MEP off-site. So, for example, in a bathroom, you might have your wall-hung cistern, all the pipe work going to it, everything just as a kind of block with the pipe work already in it, shipped to site.
And then you just fit your...
And then you fit the actual things onto it. So it's
That's
just
really...
understanding where you can add value into that process, as opposed to, I see people doing modular stuff in factories where I'm like, there is zero value in that. Like putting plasterboard on a wall and skimming it, it's the same thing.
Yeah, whether it's there or on...
all you're doing is, adding cost by doing it further away and doing it, taking longer before it's in its final installed position. So it's just understanding the nuances a bit more and not taking a very black and white approach, which is, we can do things, it's modern and clever to do things in a factory. That's just not the case.
Yeah. Okay. For a developer like myself and for the industry at wide, you can build multi-story developments using your methodologies, right? Up to, 3-4 stories? We
can go up to 5, but at the moment, really, under the legislation, 4 is really the max.
Fine. So basically, to anyone out there who's got a up to 4-story building, you can deliver and make it happen probably quicker than anyone.
Yeah.
And based on today's rates, probably cheaper.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. The speed thing, I always think the speed thing is often overlooked. So a lot of people focus on the speed of construction, right? How long does it take to get something built? Facet Homes, we build fast, but actually if you get a good contractor who's well organised and knows what they're doing, they'll build it fast too. Yeah. The biggest time saving that is so frequently overlooked is how long it takes you to get from planning to putting your shovel in the ground.
Yeah.
That time of which quite typically looks like architect doing technical details, tendering, negotiation, mobilisation, bit of redesign. It's years. I see people losing 9 months, 1 year, 2 years.
Yeah. And so I see how the way that you design shaves off time in the post-planning to starting on site point of view. Are you finding you're helping planning go through quicker than others might expect? Or as you said, that's the biggest frustration right now?
Planning is always a challenge, no matter where you are, and it's the same challenges for us. Unfortunately, there's no magic wand. we're very good at it and we have a good strategy, and I think it's just, you know, knowing when to listen, I think a lot of it, to your planning consultant, who, you know, the advice and information that's coming back. And sometimes, you know, I think over the years I've learned that planning it's a weird language, and you need somebody to interpret it for you, you know, because it doesn't always make sense. So we're really reliant on good planning consultants to tell us what it all means, because it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't. And so often it's either down to the individual or the politics behind that plan that you're dealing with. And it's not just black and white in policy, and that's the hard thing. I think that probably wraps it up for me. And honestly, I found it super interesting. I'm sure Charlie would have as well. And I can hear him. I've heard him at times be like, wow. So thank you. That was really, really amazing. Really
fantastic. Thank you.